Hey, this is John Corcoran from smartbusinessrevolution.com. I'm the chief revolutionary over there, and I am an outlier.
Welcome to Outlier on Air with Ever Gonzalez, the show where we interview the founders, disruptors, and mavens of the world. Learn how grit, failure, and success are all a part of the entrepreneurial journey.
Hey everybody, welcome to Outlier on Air, the podcast where we interview founders, disruptors, and mavens. As always, I'm your host, Ever Gonzalez. On today's episode, we have John Corcoran of Smart Business Revolution. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ever, for having me. Glad to be here.
We're happy to have you. There are a lot of things that you're doing that I'm excited about. We've been following the podcast, the blog, all of the things that you're doing right now, and they just kind of resonate with me, and I have a feeling that they're going to resonate with a lot of our outliers that are listening right now. So thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So let's first of all, let's talk about where you're calling us from. Where are you located right now?
So I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been here for about the last 13 years. Moved around a lot, especially because of different employment opportunities, which we can get into. I had some pretty cool opportunities, which I feel very fortunate about, which were all really because of building relationships with the right people, which is what I focus on these days. So happy to talk about that.
For sure, and we'll get into that here in just a sec. But obviously, you are close to the mecca of startups and entrepreneurship and things like that. What's it like running your own little empire in a location like that? Easier, harder? What are the pros and cons of where you are right now?
Oh man, it'd be interesting to do it from somewhere else because I've transitioned. So my background is I'm an attorney. I've been a practicing attorney for the last 8 years, although I don't practice much anymore. But that was my avenue into entrepreneurship. I started my own small boutique law firm here in the San Francisco Bay Area, working primarily with entrepreneurs and small business owners, and I love doing that. But at the same time, the legal business model is completely screwed up. It depends on how many hours you can trade per day, and you can only charge so much per hour. And so I started looking for other ways to make it more scalable, and that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing with Smart Business Revolution. But in terms of whether there are advantages, I don't know if you know Noah Kagan is the founder of AppSumo and SumoMe. He's a very successful entrepreneur, and I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years, and he's coming into San Francisco a week from today, and we're getting together for lunch, and we're in the process of inviting some other startup and SaaS founders to come out to lunch in San Francisco. That's the kind of thing that would never be possible if I wasn't living in San Francisco. But on the other hand, the trade-off is it's damn expensive to live here.
It is. Beautiful, but expensive.
And that made the transition very hard because from making when you're working as a lawyer, you can charge a pretty decent hourly rate, and you can make a good living, not a great living. The problem is there's kind of a cap, as I mentioned, on how much you can make, and so the transition is difficult. It's not like I could just live really cheaply. It's very expensive to live here. And so it's taken a while to transition from one business to the other because I couldn't do it all at once. I couldn't drop everything and just focus on this other thing. But on the other hand, yeah, I do really like being around the startup vibe and a lot of entrepreneurs. And San Francisco is the birthplace of Google and Facebook and Salesforce.com, and Twitter and Craigslist and Yelp. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's amazing the different companies that have come out of here, and so it's cool being around all that.
We've taken our podcast on the road, and we've done interviews, in LA, Vegas, but the Bay Area, obviously, for obvious reasons, is one of our favorites. So maybe next time we're up there, we're going to have to come see you in person.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, there's a lot of great entrepreneurs that you could interview for weeks on end here.
We can spend our entire year out there for sure.
Yeah.
Now, I feel that our audience knows you, at least knows some of the things that you're doing with the retreats that we're going to get into here in just a bit. But for sure, the blog and the podcast. But for those that might not know you, let me go down some bullet points of what you do, and then let's just kind of get into the meat of this. You're former White House writer under the Clinton administration, CEO, attorney, advisor to entrepreneurs. You're a Forbes and Art of Manliness contributor. and business relationships expert. You are, the reason that we have you here is obviously because of all of that, but you are a master builder of networks and networking and being able to kind of get out there and build your own little tribe, your own little group, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's what's going to be beneficial to our audience. Did I miss anything in your in your history? And I know we can spend quite a lot of time talking about the details, but let's talk about some of the major ones. How did you get into the White House gig?
How to get into the White House gig? So, in college, I applied for an internship program in Washington, D.C. through my university, where people would go to Washington, D.C. and they would intern not just at the White House but other locations. And then you apply separately through the White House internship program. Now, that I'm so old now that this was actually before White House intern had the connotation that it does now, because it was pre-Monica Lewinsky. It was actually the fall before the Monica Lewinsky scandal happened that I first ended up going to the White House. And so, I thought, hey, this is going to be great. White House intern is going to be at the top of my resume. Sure. And then I come home and, it meant something a little bit different. I ended up, that was, I don't know if it was a bit of a stroke of luck. I applied to it. I was an English major. I'd done some political work on a local level at my university prior to that. And the member of Congress at the time, for the Santa Barbara area had been a professor at my school, UCSB, UC Santa Barbara, which is where I went to school. And his daughter worked at the White House. She ended up being my supervisor. So she probably looked at the applications coming in and saw UCSB. Hey, that's my hometown. And maybe that's, how I got lucky. Maybe my writing sample helped. I didn't really have any great connections. The story behind getting the actual job later, that's a little bit more poignant to what I do now, because the truth was I was very deliberately and intentionally wanted to get a job at the White House, and I kept in touch with the speechwriters and other people who worked at the White House for months afterwards. I went back to college to graduate from college, and then I was even working actually in the entertainment industry in LA, working primarily for DreamWorks, and looking for opportunities at the White House. And one of the speechwriters who I'd remained in touch with told me about this writing position that came along, and that's how I ended up getting the opening. So that's how it came about.
There's so many questions just there, but let's go through a couple with the White House here. What did your day look like? I mean, what did you spend most of your time doing? Writing, I'm assuming, but in what form and how was that done on a daily basis?
Yeah, well, I like to jokingly say we were kind of like a second-tier speechwriter. If one of the speechwriters pulled a hamstring, then we would step in for them. But so we wrote everything that they didn't want to write. So it was proclamations, it was messages, it was video scripts, it was things like that, messages to VIPs. And it was a lot of it was writing all day long and then talking to very smart people who also worked at the White House about policy matters so that we could understand it, so that we could interpret it. And then it was often reading what President Clinton had to say on a particular topic, researching past speeches that he'd written, past letters that he'd written on particular topics to try and figure out what he would say on this particular topic. And oftentimes, literally wrote letters that went to his desk in the Oval Office, and he'd look at it, maybe decide that it wasn't exactly what he wanted to say this person, and he'd cross it out, make changes, send it back to us. We'd make modifications. That didn't happen every day, but a lot of the stuff, did happen that way. So a lot of it was, working with other smart people, which was part of what I love about entrepreneurship, is that you can be very, very deliberate and intentional about surrounding yourself with other smart people who you enjoy spending time with. And so that was one of the really cool things about being at the White House. You have people from all over the country that are incredibly smart, and you get to operate at a high level with them on different policy matters and writing. So it was a lot of writing, and it was a lot of researching, and it was a lot of policy.
I love this story because it kind of leads into what we want to talk about next. But the reason I love this is I can't remember if I heard it on one of your shows or a blog post or something, but you made it clear that you did not go to an Ivy League school. Your parents were not connected. You don't come from a wealthy background, that type of stuff. To be able to get to where you got that early on in your career, it was because of what?
It was because of being deliberate about developing relationships with the right people and nurturing those relationships. So kind of a short, funny story, but I was told by this speechwriter who I'd remained in touch with. And by the way, when I remained in touch with him, I would send articles, I'd send other speeches. I'd try to be useful to him, things that he could use as inspiration for speeches that he would write. It wasn't just pinging him on a weekly basis saying, hey, do you know of any jobs for me yet? He was trying to be valuable. And then he told me about this job opportunity. So I knew, he called me and said, hey, there's this job opportunity. And this woman who's the supervisor, I told her about you. She might be calling any day now. Now, what I did was I kind of positioned myself for that opportunity. And this is another key point, is that when you see an opportunity coming along, you don't have to be passive about it. You can actually position yourself so that you can take better advantage of that opportunity. So she calls me up like a week later, and she says, hey, this is so-and-so, I got your name from Lowell Weisz, as the speechwriter who gave my name. And, I know you're interested in this position. Well, I wanted to find out about, getting your resume and getting some writing samples and tell you about what the process is and all this kind of stuff. I said, okay, that's great. I'll send you my resume. And by the way, if you'd like to see one of my writing samples, if you want, you can open up today's New York Times. I actually happen to have a letter to the editor in today's New York Times.
Nice.
Now, it was a little bit of a coincidence. I'd sent it in a couple of days earlier. It happened to be published that very day. And she just happened to call me on that day. But I had sent it in with knowledge that opportunity might come along. And so it ended up making a big impression on her, of course, right? And it's a good thing she called that day, because if she called the next day, it probably would have been, an letter to the editor in the, I don't know, Akron Daily Herald or something like that, But
that's pretty impressive. That's cool.
Yeah, it really worked out well. So, that sometimes you can position yourself for those types of opportunities to come along.
Now, now in our career, I can see that happening. I can, I obviously relate everything to myself, and would I be able to do it? Would I have first of all, the knowledge, the ambition to be able to do it? Now I say yes. You were doing this when you were in your early 20s, right? I'm thinking back at that age, and I'm like, I don't know that I would have had obviously the I don't know, what do you call it?
It's easier to piece together what the decisions that you make later in life, because you can kind of figure out why you made certain decisions that you did. And I realized that I was really shaped by the fact that I grew up, my father was a journalist, my mother was a travel agent, middle class family. They did their best to buy the nicest house in the nicest community that they could barely afford, so that we could go to a better school district when I was growing up. But my father also got laid off 3 separate times when I was growing up, and every time he got laid off, he was unemployed for a number of months, and he ended up getting a job that was thousands of miles away, each time 3,000 miles away, and we'd have to pack everything up, move away from family and friends, and get a new job on the other side of the country. And it was very traumatic for me, and I think that part of the reason that relationships became so important, part of the reason that I nurtured the relationship with that speechwriter and other speechwriters, is because I realized that. I desperately wanted my father, when he did get laid off, to be able to just call someone up and say, give me a job. And he didn't have that kind of connections. He didn't have that type of job position where he could do that. And so it made me realize the importance of nurturing relationships in a very proactive, deliberate, and intentional way. Not in a sleazy way, like you're going to try and take advantage of people, but in a deliberate and intentional way. And the analogy that I give is, it'd be like you show up the first day of college, and you just go up in the first random classroom you see, and the next day you go to a completely different classroom, and the day after that you go to a completely different classroom. And you would not accomplish anything that way. But we don't do that. What we do is we follow a course of study. We follow a plan of action, and then we follow through on that, and we get a degree. Okay? Well, we don't do that, unfortunately, when it comes to our relationships, especially when it comes to business relationships. Rather, we say, oh, well, I'll meet someone here, I'll meet someone there, and then these relationships will piece together. Well, I take a much more deliberate approach. I say you should be proactive about identifying the people who are going to be most useful for your business, for your goals, and then proactively go about building relationships with them. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're doing it with people who fulfill you, who light you up, who inspire you, you go out and you build a relationship with them by helping to support them. And we can talk about some different strategies for doing that. But that's what I recommend that people do.
Good. And it's one of the things that we've started to push this. My background's in logistics. For the most part, I kept my head down. I just got clients. We negotiated contracts. Now that I'm more in the entrepreneurial world with Outlier, the podcast, the co-working space, and the events, like I'm seeing this entire different world of how you can do business and how relationships obviously benefit you and those around you. So I'm glad that we're going to talk about that here in just a sec. But before we get into that, so you went from attorney in the Bay Area to the Smart Business Revolution. Let's talk about that and get into the details of it.
Sure. So I'd written for the web for a long time, going back to the 90s, writing for little websites and things like that, and developed, what would be called a blog today back in 1999, and done it off and on, and got serious about it again in around 2007, 2008 after I'd graduated from law school, and I was looking to distinguish myself and get back into the habit of writing. I initially started writing about legal topics. I found that was boring. No one was interested in sticking around and reading those topics, and it was just a variety of different ideas. Then I got more interested in entrepreneurship, so I started writing more about entrepreneurship, still too broad. And then eventually, from feedback from other people, started focusing in on this idea of building better relationships in business and using those to support your business so you can get more clients, so you can bring in more revenues, so you can diversify your revenues. And then I started focusing on that, and that's when things really kind of took off for me. But I mean, it was a challenge. I mean, I'll to be quite frank and honest with you, my wife thought I was crazy. A lot of my family members still think I'm crazy. They don't understand why you'd go from law to managing a blog. In fact, we just had a neighbor over the other day who she said to me, "Oh, so Nicole just told me that that you're not really practicing law anymore, that you run a blog now." And it was funny because it was just very dismissive the way that she said it. And that's entrepreneurship in a nutshell. People will challenge you. They will dismiss you. They will question what you're doing. And oftentimes it's not because they're being mean. Oftentimes it's just because they just don't understand, or because they actually think they have your best interest at heart. They'll say, like you and I both do live events. My wife or other people will say to me, like, "Oh, wow, so you haven't gotten this thing filled yet, and it's a couple of weeks away. Mm-hmm. Do you think maybe you should cancel it? Do you think maybe you stretched too far this time? Do you think maybe you're a little too big for your britches?" Say something like that. And it's like meant to be well intentioned, but it actually like gets inside your mind, and it just like, it's really the worst thing for an entrepreneur to hear. And so those things are really challenging. And that has been really challenging for me as I've transitioned, and I've made the complete transition now. I'm barely practicing law anymore. But
when you say barely, what you're doing? 20%, 30% law? What are you doing?
2% at the most.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you're all in basically.
Yeah. Well, you reach a point, and this could happen in different businesses, but you reach a point where you have to ask yourself critically, what's the smartest decision, right? And the business model of practicing law is not all that different from paying the kid next door $10 to mow your lawn. You're getting paid something to do a task one time, and it doesn't create any forward momentum. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a business that created forward momentum that continued to grow on itself. I call it snowball. It starts to snowball on itself. And when you're practicing law, or really any high-paid consulting type of work where you're getting paid a lot for a service, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this, it doesn't create as much momentum. Versus the Smart Business Revolution has created a lot more momentum. And a lot of that's out of building an email list, which is a powerful lead list of prospects who are interested in purchasing something from you. And it's enabled me to create big changes in my life, and it's enabled for the business to build as it goes along, and it's much more scalable thing.
The business as it stands now, are you pretty comfortable with it? Are there still a lot of changes that you want to make, or more things you want to implement? Or, what is all this going to look like in 3 years?
Yeah, great question. So, of course, I'm not comfortable with it. That's the nature of an entrepreneur. Like, right? You always want something else. You want something more. There's always some big thing that you're working on, So, and I think I would naturally be drawn towards that kind of discomfort. I started this side business with my partner, Dr. Jeremy Weisz, where we do entrepreneurial retreats, and that's a real fun thing I really enjoy doing. You and I were talking about that before we started recording. I love going out to different 4-star hotel locations, gathering with a group of a dozen smart entrepreneurs and helping them to create progress in their business. And I want to do more and more of that in the future. As far as Smart Business Revolution goes, I think that there are other types of training programs that I could create out there that are all aimed at this market of a small business entrepreneur, often a solopreneur or running a small business, often with a service professional background, who needs more help with getting clients, increasing their revenues, working less, being more productive. And so I think there are other types of training programs that I can create out there as well. And just continuing to grow the audience. That's a big challenge for me. I've been growing my email list a lot, and I've been doing I do a lot of webinars, and so I enjoy a lot what I'm doing right now, and I want to do more of it and grow it more, grow the audience even more. So I guess I'm constantly striving for something more.
Which is fun, as entrepreneurs in our audience. I'm assuming that there are a lot of them sitting here thinking, I'm doing something similar, or I want to do something similar. But it's easy for John. Obviously, he's intelligent, but more importantly, I think that you're outgoing, right? You're a people person. That's why you can build these networks of these relationships. What about the guy that's sitting behind his desk right now, doing whatever he's doing, saying, I want to do something similar, but I don't have the personality, or I'm a little bit more of an introvert?
Great question.
How does that work, and can it be done?
Great question. Yeah, a lot, and I do get that question a lot. People say, I'm more introverted. Can this really work for me? And that's a wonderful question. And actually, the truth is, you don't have to be the world's greatest extrovert in order to be really effective at building a network. And actually, you don't need, it's not like you'd have to become best friends with 300 different people. That would be too much. The truth is, actually, sometimes it's people who are more introverted who are just really good at following up and being consistent, following up over time, that end up doing a lot better than the world's biggest extrovert. Have you ever met someone who's just like a gregarious type of personality, maybe at a cocktail party, something like that? Mm-hmm. They make a big impression on everyone around them at that one time, and then you never hear from them again,
For sure.
Because they don't follow up. They don't continue the relationship at all. Well, that's a lot less effective than someone who's more introverted, doesn't make that big impression on other people in a room, but is really good at following up and is really good at being consistent and maybe being thoughtful and considerate about that person, or following up and being useful to the person that they met. So I think oftentimes extroversion is overrated when it comes to building relationships for your business.
For you personally, did this work well with your own personality, or did you have to kind of work at being at this level when it comes to networking and building relationships? Did this come naturally to you?
Well, I think that introversion versus extroversion is generally defined as, if you get your energy from being around other people, then you're an extrovert. If you get your energy from recouping and being by yourself, then you're more of an introvert. I've heard people say that. I get a lot of energy around being around other people, so I guess I'm more of an extrovert. However, I do have introverted tendencies. After all, I spent 3 years in law school. You got to be a little bit of an introvert in order to survive that. You spend a lot of time with just a textbook. So I relate to both sides of the spectrum, and I know what it's like, and I'm sympathetic to people who get their energy from being alone. But I don't like it when people use that sort of thing as an excuse.
Sure.
Because I know a lot of introverts who are incredibly effective at being deliberate, reaching out to the people who are going to be useful to their industry, being very intentional about building relationships with the right people and following up. And so don't use your own lack of extroversion as an excuse for lack of action.
I want to talk about some of the things that you're doing to build your empire with webinars and other resources and tools that entrepreneurs can use, those that follow you and those that you're obviously attracting. But let's get into the meat of this building relationships. What are some of the mistakes that we're making right now? Other than maybe being an introvert and all that stuff what we just talked about, what are some of the mistakes that entrepreneurs are making when they're trying to build whatever you want to call it, a network, a larger relationship base, those type of things? What are you seeing on a regular basis?
Sure. So one of the big ones is just lack of planning and lack of being intentional about who are the types of people you want to build relationships with. Now, that takes a little bit of reflection and a little bit of looking at your business and deciding if you're going in the right direction, deciding if you want to do something different. Maybe you're listening to this and you're actually an employee right now and you'd like to start your own business, or maybe not. Maybe you want to work your way up the ladder inside of a corporation. That's totally fine, but it's about being, cognizant of the types of goals that you want to achieve. And then from there, it's about identifying what are the opportunities, what are the ways that we're going to develop relationships with the right people. And that means, it means the groups that you join, it means the events that you attend, and it means the people who you're going to surround yourself with, right? Because we, to a certain extent, we're a product of the people who are around us, but there's so many tools available to us now. We no longer need to blame that. I mean, 100 years ago, you didn't have an opportunity to reach out and build relationships with people across the globe, or a best-selling author or something like that, or keynote speaker. But now those tools are available to us. So one of the strategies that I recommend people do is create what I call a conversations list, which is a list of the 50 people that you'd like to build or nurture a relationship with over the course of the next 12 months. And what that does is it gives you a roadmap of the people who you want to build relationships with, you just need to be consistent about going about it over time. And we can talk about some different strategies for doing that. But I also recommend creating a conversations list for the groups that you belong to and the events that you attend. And that would be a smaller list. So it's a list of maybe 8 to 10 different groups that you might join, and 8 to 10 different events that you might attend, conferences, that sort of thing. And then what you do is, from that list, you narrow it down to 1 or 2 groups or 1 or 2 events. And you focus in on those for like a year, okay, a year or two. And I'm not just saying you be one of 500 members of your local chamber of commerce. I'm saying you get really involved with that group. You volunteer, you help to organize an event, or you staff the door, or you join the board or something like that. Get really jump into it, because oftentimes getting more deeply involved in one group is a lot more effective than just a shallow surface level involvement in many different groups. I say that oftentimes we need to drop out of more groups and focus on just a couple of groups. And what you can do is, after a year or two of doing that, of getting deeply involved in this one particular group, you can decide whether it's good for you to continue. What I see people make, a big mistake I see a lot of people make, is they'll join groups and they'll not really get involved. And then after a year or a couple of months, it'll just peter out and they'll just try something else. You see that a lot of times in the online world. People join some paid community, they do it for a little while, doesn't work out, they try something else. They haven't really given it the shot that it deserves. So I recommend deepening your involvement with a handful of small groups. And then as far as the people goes, the list of 50 people on your conversations list, find ways to build relationships with those people. And it might be some local individual in your local community. It might be a friend of a friend. It might be an existing client. It might be an ideal client you'd like to work with in the future. Find ways to nurture those relationships, whether it means going to events where those other people are going to be, whether it means interviewing them. That's an amazing strategy. What we're doing right now, you're interviewing me, and I've used my podcast in the same way. Interviewing someone, whether you use it for a podcast or some other purpose, is a wonderful way to get some time with someone you might not otherwise get time with, and then following through on that strategy over a 12-month period.
I love it. I think I've been guilty of playing fast and loose with my relationships in the past, especially early on, where now, as I focus on these things, it's a different world, right? I mean, you build strong, lasting relationships, and obviously that's the way to go, and that's what you've been preaching, and that's what you've been doing, and it's been working. Now, I think you and I both agree that relationships and face-to-face type of meetings and conversations at the end of the day work best, but there are a lot of different tools and resources that we can use. In your opinion, where does technology fit in all this?
Technology is amazing how much it has evolved in recent years and created greater opportunities for us. Social media is a big one because, you are in southern Utah. I'm here in San Francisco. And something like social media you can use to nurture relationships in the way that you would with someone who worked down the hall from you, but you don't see on a daily basis, or you don't see on a weekly basis. you see them every once in a while. You see them in the cafeteria, or you see them in a local coffee shop, and you kind of develop that relationship over time. Well, before we used to be limited by geography. Now, social media allows us to be limited by interest and to segregate ourselves, or to join different groups by interest. And then you can nurture these relationships over time, whether it's someone who is, as I said, a best-selling author or a speaker or a business owner or someone like that, someone who you'd maybe like to have as a client at some point in the future, or just someone who there's some mutually beneficial relationship to having a relationship with that person. So technology is definitely social media is definitely a huge one, but also as far as I mentioned, interviews are an amazing tool. And so you can use your laptop computer and a $30 or $40 microphone and some free software like Skype and call recorder, which I think is $20 or $30. Publishing a podcast is very inexpensive, or just recording the interview and putting it up on a blog, or even just writing up an interview, interviewing someone and writing up for LinkedIn's publishing platform, which is free, or Medium, which is free to contribute to, or some local community newspaper. All these things are amazing opportunities. And then another big one that I've been talking about in recent years is webinars. Yep. Now, I think that we're on the front edge of an explosion of popularity in webinars. And you could even say something like a Facebook Live and Periscope are an extension of webinars, because what they are is real-time interactive video technology that's becoming deployed on a massive scale. I mean, even just 10 years ago, if you want to do an hour of live video worldwide, it would cost you $30,000, $40,000. Now that's free for you and it's in your pocket. And the impact that has is you can build relationships with people regardless of borders, regardless of geography. And that technology, I think, is just going to continue to have an impact on our society. We're already at a point where a lot of people can decide to live wherever they want to live. One of my students who went through one of my webinar training programs, she's an American who ended up moving to Tasmania, which is an island off the southern coast of Australia. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason she was able to do that, she lives in a 600-person town. She wanted to start a retreat facility down there, but she also wanted to continue doing some business coaching and marketing work that she'd done in the United States. And normally you run out of clients really quickly in a 600-person town. But because of webinars, because of the tools that we have available to us, she could continue to work with clients on a global scale because of those tools.
So now, how are you using webinars and these type of tools for your own personal business?
Sure. So what webinars have done for me is they've allowed me to make the transition from building relationships one-to-one to building them one-to-many. And that's where you really start to scale a business. That's where you really start to have a bigger impact. And, it gets to the point where there's only so much you can do with your time, especially as you have children, you get married, we all get busy. And it becomes harder and harder to build relationships one-to-one. You go down to a Chamber of Commerce meeting or something like that, and you're meeting people one at a time. And if you've got a business that provides a very finite type of solution, unusual type of solution, it could take it's like a needle in a haystack trying to find people who are right for you. But something like a webinar, it's like doing a speech, but with all the advantages of not having to do a speech. I mean, if you go speak at a conference, you've got to get on a plane, go away from your family, stay at a hotel, take a couple days out of work, just all for speaking 45 minutes, if you're lucky, maybe less than that. And then after that, you don't have a way to continue to communicate with all those people because you didn't get their email addresses or their mailing addresses or anything like that. Versus a webinar, you don't have to travel anywhere. You can do it from virtually anywhere. People will freely register for a webinar because it doesn't cost them anything. You get their email address so you can continue to communicate with them going forward in the future. And as I said, you didn't have to travel, and you can continue to create that snowball effect where your audience, your market, your lead list starts to grow, and that creates additional opportunities for you. And this is the key point: those people are building a relationship with you. They're getting to know you. They're getting more comfortable with you. But you're not doing it one-to-one. You're doing it one-to-many. You could be doing the same activities that you're doing for one person or 5 or 10 or 50 or 500 is exactly the same, and that's where the real scalable potential comes in.
Yeah, I was going to ask. It's great for people that have a large following, or they've already done things that kind of put them in that position. What about the newbie? Can a newbie kind of put up content on a webinar and get the ball rolling there? And how would they do it?
Absolutely, and it's a great way to get started. Because you can start figuring out what others are interested in getting from you, starting with just a Q&A webinar. So, first you want to narrow down the huge universe. You decide, okay, what's my area of expertise? What am I going to focus on here? What's the general area? You might not know exactly precisely, but you kind of have a general idea of what you focus on. Okay, and then you start hanging out in different communities so that people start to know you as an expert in that area, which you're probably already doing already. So you're probably already joining different communities, probably attending different conferences related to that particular area of expertise. And then a webinar is just an amazing tool for taking these relationships, this web of relationships, which are dispersed. Some are in your address book. Some are on Facebook. Some are on LinkedIn. Some are on Twitter. Some are from conferences. Taking all those people and starting to channel them down into one place where you can communicate with them en masse. My email list I was under 1,000 2 years ago. I'm over 40,000 now. Nice. Because of webinars. Mm-hmm. And so I can send an email to 40,000 people, which would takes the same amount of time as it would to send an email to one person. That is true scale. And as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, then those opportunities get larger and larger and larger. So that's really where some amazing opportunities start to crop up.
I like the fact that with you and the way you're approaching this and the things that you've done, I mean, really, there shouldn't be anything keeping us from succeeding, or at least being able to build a small following or a small group of really strong relationships. We can obviously tell that you're outgoing, like we mentioned before, and very capable of handling these things. What makes you uncomfortable? What do you struggle with, maybe with your own business?
Oh, wow, what a great question. Plenty of things. I mean, there are always, as we mentioned earlier, kind of those demons, the doubts that you have. Everyone has those. You
at this point?
Everyone has them at every level. I guarantee. So if we were to go to a conference that was invite only for the top 500 largest company CEOs in the United States, okay? So like the Forbes 500 or whatever CEOs, right? I guarantee you that there would be a CEO that was, looking across the room. Maybe he's in his company is number 400 on that list. He looks across the room and he sees another CEO who's got a company that's in the top 100, so top 100 largest companies in the United States. And he says to himself, he looks across the room, he says, "Oh, well, look, there's that CEO I've admired from afar over there, and I'd love to meet that person, but you know what? I'm not going to go introduce myself because they might not be interested in meeting me." That happens at every level. The doubts start to creep in. So I experienced that, I experienced, doubts about my own business and challenges with scaling it up and the pace at which you scale. That's a big one, because especially when it comes to, there's so many different opportunities today. One of the problems is overwhelm, simply wanting to pursue different opportunities, but also knowing that if you pursue them all half-hearted, that's not as effective as just pursuing one and taking it as far as you can. And part of the reason that I've done so many webinars, I did 83 live webinars in 2015.
Wow.
Part of the reason that I've gone so far on them is because I didn't exhaust it. So I've continued to do it because it's worked very effectively for me. So it's a better approach to really just drill down, but that by necessity means that you're giving up on other opportunities, which might be, you never know, which might be a better opportunity, might be a better avenue to pursue. So you're constantly kind of playing that game in your head. Should I be doing something else, or should I be doing this? Is this the right thing for me to be doing right now? Especially when it's something that takes a lot of time. Part of the reason no one ever writes a book, or a lot of the population doesn't write a book, is because it takes a lot of time. And it's a large plan that you need to follow up on consistently over time. And anything like that is a lot of people are gonna stop along the way.
I love it. At the end of the day, how do you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as a guy who helped other people to overcome any sorts of insecurities about their own lack of expertise or lack of having something to offer to others in their field, especially people that they admire from afar, and help them to get over those mindset barriers and to go out there not with an attitude of what they could get for themselves, but with an attitude of how they could be of service. And I want to inspire more people to do that, to follow through on that, and to get great results as a consequence of it. So there's a famous saying by Zig Ziglar: you can have everything in life you want if you'll just help other people get what they want. And so I like to think of myself as helping the rubber meet the road in a nice saying like that by giving people tools and explaining exactly how they can go about it in our digital world that we live in today, especially with the exponential technologies that are coming along and becoming available to us today. So I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about the years ahead.
I love it. It's I think we see it all the time, right? There are a lot of very capable entrepreneurs that either just don't know where to start, or there's sometimes even a mental roadblock that we don't know how to overcome. I love the fact that you're doing this. I'm a fan of what you're doing. We wish you much success. The last question before we let you go. Overall, what kind of advice would you have for my audience, something that we can implement in our lives right away?
Follow through on the conversation list strategy that I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Take 15 or 20 minutes. If you're driving right now, wait until you get to the office or your house. Sit down, take out a blank piece of paper or Microsoft Excel or Google Drive, or it doesn't matter, and write out a list of the 50 people who you are inspired by. They could be friends, they could be friends of friends, they could be past clients, they could be potential clients, it could be Richard Branson, it could be Oprah Winfrey, it could be someone who you really admire from afar, it could be someone who wrote a book that you really like. And take time over the next 12 months to build relationships with each and every single one of them, okay? Reach out to them, at least try, right? Even if you don't get a response, you tried, okay? So follow through on that. That'll give you a roadmap, and I guarantee you that'll have an impact on your business.
I love it. We use something similar, and it's been great for the podcast. It's been great for our speaker list. And like you mentioned, we don't hear back from everybody, but I'm often surprised at the people that we do hear back from. So that's great advice. Thank you very much. Where can we find you online? Where can our audience engage with you?
Oh, great. So smartbusinessrevolution.com is my online home. You can check me out there and sign up for my email list. A lot of people like to download my free email templates. I got some free email templates that you can use for that idea we're talking about. Sending an email to some VIP or an influencer or just some successful person in your local community you admire, and send an email to them and start forming a relationship with that person. So go download those email templates and feel free to hit reply and say hello. I'm always glad to chat with new people.
So Outliers, you can go to outliermagazine.co. That's outliermagazine.co. First of all, review the podcast. Then you'll also be able to find John's website, social media links, reach out to him, sign up for the newsletter. He's obviously doing some amazing things. You heard him here. He has a lot of great words of wisdom, and there's no stopping him anytime soon. So, like I said, reach out to him. John, hey, this has been amazing. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and for spending some time with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Ever.
So, Outliers, we'll talk to you tomorrow.